Oh, so I wanted to create something that you could use and listen to and then start your work before Thursday if that's what you wish to do. So just thought I'd do a quick video run through of the assignment. I think it sounds really complicated, the question, but it actually isn't really when you look at it. And there's a couple of things that you could do to make it easy for yourself. So obviously, we need to talk about the learning outcomes, but you'll be doing that anyway if you follow the plan. So I wouldn't worry too much about the learning outcomes, because if you follow the plan, you'll be doing them anyway. So it's a 3,000 word essay, and the title is Influenced by a Social Democratic Conception of Social Justice, the Development of the Welfare State After 1945 held out the promise of a society free from the kind of poverty and exclusion experienced by millions of UK citizens in the 1920s and 1930s. How successful was the post-1945 welfare state in eliminating poverty and exclusion and focusing upon the experiences of different social groups? Has the trajectory of welfare reform since 1979 assisted or frustrated the achievement of this goal? So basically what you're probably thinking first is, what does the social democratic conception of social justice mean? And then what happened in 1979 that maybe changed that, and has that been more successful or not? Those are the two aspects of this essay. If you want to think about it in another way, left and right is a good way to look at it as well. So left, the social democratic perspective is left wing. So they believe in certain things. After 1979, politics, the government, the country became more right wing. As you may or may not know, 1979 was the election of Margaret Thatcher, who completely changed the idea of what social justice was and what politics should do to help people. So that's the whole crux of this essay. Essentially what you're saying is, what happened after 1945, is that still happening? And if not, why not? And what effect has that had? There's a very exciting time for politics at the moment, exciting in quotation marks, because I know some people don't find it exciting, but obviously we've got an election coming up, and there's a lot of stuff in the newspapers and things like that. So I do recommend that you read the newspaper. A couple of times when I've been off, I've been an article I really wanted to send, but obviously I couldn't because I was off work. But I'll draw your attention to a couple of those later. Obviously, in relation to the social groups, it depends which one you pick. So for example, if you're doing disability, if you're doing the elderly, if you're doing migrants, it will depend upon what example you use. So first of all, in your intro, what is the social democratic approach? So the social democratic approach is essentially what happened after the Beveridge report. So this guy called William Beveridge, he wrote a report and he said, we have these problems in Britain, therefore this is the way to solve them. He suggested a welfare state, free healthcare, and quite generous benefits and payments to people who weren't able to support themselves. That's the social democratic approach. In fact, Beveridge wasn't a social democrat, he was a liberal, but we associate the social democrat approach with Beveridge because the Labour Party after 1945 adopted what he said we should do. So social democrats, just to recap, essentially believe that we should have high taxes or relatively high taxes, and that should support a strong welfare state that protects people and tries to make the world more equal. Okay? Some people believe the opposite, that we should have as little benefits as possible because scroungers take advantage of it. Therefore, we should cut them. And if we do, people will go out and get a job. So those are two opposites, aren't they? So if you think about those opposites in the question, it's kind of a good way to argue about what happened after 1979. After 1945, when the Labour Party implemented the Beveridge report, was this successful? How was it successful? That was 1945 to the 1970s. And that followed what's called a Keynesian approach to welfare. All that means is the government is supposed to spend money in order to help the economy and to help people. Okay. Nowadays, the Keynesian approach tends to do the opposite, to not spend money and let people do what the state used to do for them themselves. So, for example, you'll have noticed that nowadays it's really difficult to get appointments. with doctors and the hospital and things like that, that's because we don't spend enough money on healthcare. Maybe we should go back to that approach. You know, you can argue that in your essay. The 1970s, right? The 1970s was a really important time in politics for the UK and across the world. Basically, what we had was a situation where there was a lot of problems, economic problems. So the governments responded to that by basically trying to cut welfare and trying to cut wages and things like that. Then what we have Margaret Thatcher being elected in 1979. Okay, and what she essentially did was she completely changed the way that we see politics and the way that we see social justice. So rather than saying we need welfare, we need high employment, we need high wages, she said we need welfare to be cut, we need regulations of business to be cut. We can't guarantee that people can have a job, so there was really high levels of unemployment and things like that. That's called neoliberalism. And neoliberalism is a good thing to look up. Essentially what neoliberalism is the idea that the government shouldn't really get involved in the running of the economy. We should let businesses do whatever they want, and that will be better for everybody. Okay, so that's essentially neoliberalism. So for example, we do that with healthcare nowadays. We run it like a business, and if people can't get an appointment, you know, that's tough. They can go private if they want to. That's the opposite of the Keynesian approach. The Keynesian approach would say we need to spend money on healthcare, and that'll help everybody. The neoliberal approach and the approach of monetarism, which is Friedman and Hayek, says government shouldn't spend money. It's a waste of money. What we should do is get people to take responsibility for their own lives and not rely on welfare. Charles Murray is another person who says that he thinks that the benefit system essentially rewards people for going out and having kids outside of marriage and things like that. So those are two opposite approaches. One is a left-wing approach that was followed until the early 70s. One is a right-wing approach, which is followed since 1979, really. Then theories of justice. Right, theories of justice, you will have covered that anyway, but a theory of justice is essentially a theory on how we should run society to make it fair. So obviously some people think we should have really high taxes, we should use that money to help the poor, and the richest should pay the highest tax because they earn the most money, and the poorest should pay the lowest tax and they should get the most support. That's the social democratic approach. The opposite approach, the neoliberal approach, says the poor are poor essentially because they're not clever enough to be rich. So, you know, if you give them welfare, they have no reason to try and be rich. There's other theories of social justice. I've got a PowerPoint on that. We can do a whole lesson on it if you want. It's up to you. Then 1997 to 2010, we had New Labour, right? What New Labour did was they tried to combine the best of the Labour Party and the best of what Margaret Thatcher was doing. So they didn't try to stop people being super wealthy. They tried to cut welfare and get people back into work and things like that. But they did try to bring the least fortunate up a little bit more. And they focused on things like social exclusion and things like that to try and help people. Some people think that approach is the best approach to politics. And now, when we have an election coming up, the government, the Labour Party who are trying to get elected are following that approach a little bit more. They're not being too much like the old Labour Party. They're not being too much like the Conservatives. They're trying to strike a balance. Then since 2010, we've had the current government. They instigate the policy called austerity. What that means is just trying to not spend money, trying to save money, and making sure the government didn't spend too much money on things like health, education, and things like that. We had policies like the bedroom tax, cuts to services for the disabled and things like that. Some people think that's horrendously unfair. Some people think it's a way to help those people get back to taking responsibility for their own lives. It depends on what your view is. So, as I've said, one of the things that you need to do is you need to talk about social groups and the impact of welfare. I just picked two at a minimum and then talk about those groups. So, for example, the elderly, the disabled, women, immigrants. The disabled, that's quite a good one to do because there's a lot of stuff, and disabled is a very broad term as well. Also, immigrants, there's a lot of stuff about immigration at the moment with the Rwanda policy and things like that. As I've said here, you can integrate it in another section or you can do it on its own. There's lots and lots and lots of stuff about this at the moment. Some people think the way the current government are doing things is really unfair to a lot of social groups. Some people think the government doesn't have enough money to support everybody, so therefore they need to look after themselves a little bit more. Again, it's up to you what you believe. Then as a conclusion, I would say, what's the future of welfare? We've got things like demographic changes, population changes, in other words. So we've got an aging population and people worry about the effect of this on welfare. The pensions time bomb. How can we afford to pay all these pensions? One of the government strategies is to just higher the retirement age every couple of years. Eventually, we're all going to be dead before we can finish work. You know, is that fair? Some people believe in a universal basic income where you're guaranteed a minimum income by the state. So, for example, the government might pay £1,000 into your bank account every month, regardless of what you do. Some people think that's a really good idea. Some people think that it's a stupid idea and nobody would go to work if it happened. Could a future government propose a completely different idea of welfare provision? You know, you might find something in your research that discusses that, and that'd be awesome. Just to draw your attention to, as I've said, there's loads and loads of stuff, articles and things like that about particular groups. So this is from last year, late last year, and it says disabled people are likely to lose $5,000 a year because of the budget that Jeremy Hunt announced. You know, this is the government trying to save money, which is fair enough. You know, they can't be spending, you know, unlimited amounts of money, but why is it that they're choosing to take that money from the, you know, the most vulnerable people in our society? Another thing that the government has said is apparently we have a sick note culture in the UK, and Rishi Sunak wants to stop GPs signing sick notes for people. And this is an article from a woman who basically said that she wouldn't be alive if the GP wasn't able to do that. So, you know, this is about social justice, isn't it? For some people, people should not be able to go to their GP and say, you know, I don't feel well and stay off work, right? For some people, that's a really, really important thing. Remember, all of these things have economic costs as well. If someone's not working, they're not contributing to the economy, so that costs the government money. Yeah, so I would encourage you to really, really read the newspaper and try and find some examples and things like that that you can integrate into your assignment, and also think about what the next government are going to do, you know, what their idea of social justice is, what they're going to do to make things better in our society. So yeah, there's loads more help I can give you on that, but I thought a basic run through might be helpful. So yeah.